Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to introduce my guests for today. With me is Kimberly Davis, who is an author, TEDx speaker, and founder of Brave Leadership, leading development programs worldwide around authentic leadership, purpose, presence, and influence. Jennifer Hyland, joining for the first time, is a retired Deputy Chief Constable and former Superintendent with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. As an advisor and mentor, she devotes herself to a future built on a foundation of principled leadership. And Peter Winick works with individuals and organizations to build and grow revenue streams through their thought leadership platforms and is host of the Leveraging Thought Leadership podcast. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And here is our topic for today. In this week's headlines, Inc.com highlighted a viral April 12th post that described the Robert W. Baird Investment Bank as, quote, the epitome of a sweatshop, unquote. In response, the Wall Street Journal reported bosses bullying their employees into working 110-hour weeks, ignoring the firm's no work on Saturday policy, and sending emails at 3:30 a.m. to check that employees were still online. As far back as 2017, Inc.com columnist Jacob Morgan ranked Baird third on his list of companies with the lowest scoring employee experience. Wall Street Journal reported such practices in the industry that they routinely contribute to serious health problems and have even been linked with employee deaths. Ironically, but not surprisingly, bosses at Baird frequently complain about low productivity. The same newsfeed included an article in Forbes describing the rise of snow-plow managers who refuse to delegate, thereby contributing to their own stress, isolation, and burnout while disempowering and demoralizing employees. It seems bizarre to witness the simultaneous rise of two such antithetical trends. What do they have in common? What they do have in common, however, is bosses pursuing practices that so clearly run counter to their own best interests, as well as those of the company. How can we explain the rise of such disparate lose-lose behaviors? And what can be done to put a stop to them? The floor is open.
Well, let's see what I'm not so sure the two are related, so I think I'll break them apart a little bit. So the 110-hour week problem, what I would say about that is anybody working there, given that they're coming in bottom of the rankings, sort of knew what they signed up for, right? Like this isn't like you signed up for 9 to 5 work-life balance and, smoothies in the office place. If anyone with half a brain going through an interview process, it's out there. What they don't talk about in the newsfeed is what's the trade-off? Are they making a ton of money, or is it the opportunity to make a ton of money? So maybe I'm ancient, I don't know, but I find there are certain companies, industries, etc., where the trade-off is, a 25-year-old kid can make 300 grand a year, and you're going to work 100 hours a week. That's not a deal that everyone will take, and that's fine. But if you take that deal, then I think you don't really have an opportunity to whine about it. Now, the bullying piece is different, right? Like, so if somebody's being treated, if being treated poorly is asked to work 110-hour week, maybe being treated disrespectfully and all those things, that's inexcusable.
So a couple of things. One, it said that the company was not adhering to its own policy. So it's possible that people did not go in expecting this. And it went into more detail about the 3:30 a.m. emails. One person said that they hadn't been asked to do anything since 8 p.m. And then they got a 3:30 email just to check that they were online. So could be it's a little more toxic than just having to work a lot.
Right.
No, they had sacred Saturdays, which nobody adhered to. A lot of the policies that were in place and that had been communicated during the hiring process weren't adhered to. But I think what I think this is an evidence of is how much we're willing to buy into a promise of something because we think it's going to give us money or power or both, right?
Yeah.
And what we're willing to sacrifice because as this is going on, I can tell you for myself, if someone were to say you need to be on till 3 o'clock in the morning, that is the very moment I would say bye-bye, this is
Right.
not going to work for me, right? But what are we willing to exchange our life for the promise of money and power? And I think that's a big pretty big conversation. I think that there's a lot that we've sacrificed for the promise of money and power.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm really fascinated listening to the conversation because I personally think that the two behaviors are actually directly linked. And I think that because I've actually worked in an environment in policing, which is very hierarchical, sort of structured. And I've been not only under the snowplow manager and the overworked person, but if I'm being very truthful, I've actually caught myself being the snowplow myself before as well. And I
Mhm.
did it, I've seen it. The reason why I did it and the reason why it was done to me can be for different reasons, but I think they're connected. And the connection comes like this. When I became a snowplow manager leader, it was because I had been promoted into a new higher ranking role. And I got that role because I knew how to do the jobs below me very, very well. When I got into the new role, I desperately hung on to the kind of work that made me feel competent and skilled and comfortable. That meant I was now doing the work that I should have left behind for my team. But it also meant I actually wasn't doing I didn't have the time to do all of my jobs. So now I'm starting to do that 100-hour work week we're talking about because I'm hanging on desperately to what makes me feel comfortable.
Mhm.
More importantly, I'm actually preventing my people from getting their work week in, right? So it's
Right.
interesting how people are like, there's nothing to happen at 8 o'clock, but then the question of whether you're available is still there. And I got out of snowplow management because my team respected and trusted me and came to me and said, you are not doing your job supporting us because you're still in the work. And we need you to abandon the work and go do your job because there's points not being taken care of because you've
Mhm.
tied up part of your pie chart doing work that's meant for us. And so
Yeah.
when we talk, it's interesting, we talk about the promise and the what you have to offer yourself. If you take away people's work that come into the job and they expect to grow and develop, but you're still doing the work, you have taken away that promise of future advancement, stretch assignments, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And so I actually see when we snowplow, we cause more work for everyone because people start desperately trying to find out work
Mhm.
to fill their day and you're not letting them grow. So they're a little confused as to what they're supposed to be doing. So
Mhm.
it's interesting that we're thinking if they're not, I see them as very connected.
There's so many elements in what you just said, Jen. First of all, thank you for your vulnerability and willingness to talk about your own process of overcoming an ineffective management style. Also, I mean, kudos to your team for
Right.
coming to you, feeling they could come to you, coming to you, and addressing the problem head
Yeah.
on in a respectful way. And is it the Peter principle that says everybody rises to their level of incompetence?
Yeah.
Uh,
I've never heard that.
yeah, people are you get promoted because you're doing your job well, which doesn't necessarily indicate that you're prepared for the job into which you're being promoted. And if there isn't a training and some sort of transitional process, then you can't end up flailing
Mhm.
despite having been exceptional at what you were doing before.
Yeah. I see both situations as evidence of survival mode. So in the investment bank situation, um, the well, I don't know that the people that were creating the environment, the leaders and the senior partners and all of that were necessarily in survival mode, other than the environment almost becomes do or die. Like if you don't do this, everything's the stakes feel so high. And we elevate those stakes. And then going into the situation, if you were one of the junior junior people going in. I think it's a survival mode thing that a lot of us, our identity is if we don't arrive at this certain level of what society says is important and powerful, then we're nothing. It's almost, we get so black and white in our thinking about it. And so to land a job at a place like that in our society is like, oh, you got it, you made it. Well, the last thing you want to do is to fail when you've been told you're so lucky you got this, you made it. And they feel like at any moment, if they just stay in it, that promise of, success and power and I will have made it is there on the horizon, right? So, and then in the other situation, I think to Jen's point, the snowplow managers are in survival mode. A lot of times they don't know what they're doing. They've never been in this role before. I think it's a great illustration of the need for leadership development and how often we put people in situations where they're not equipped to really succeed.
I would add to that, to Jen's point on the snowplow manager. I think there's two types. So you were self-aware enough, Jen, to realize, whoa, that's me. And it's at a phase where I just got promoted to this piece. So that to me is excusable. Like, okay, that makes sense. I got some adjusting to do. Is that 3 months? Is that 6 months? There's a period of time if you're self-aware to say, I'm doing the thing that I shouldn't be doing. How do I not do that? And the fact that you had the rapport and the relationship with your team for them to say, hey, boss, because not every boss that we've had would we have done that with. So I think if you're in a transition phase, I would kind of give that a pass, right? I think if someone's in permanent snow plow mode, it's either insecure, like that's someone that shouldn't be in a role, right? Like, and not good for them, the company, the people underneath them, even if they've got this Superman complex or whatever it is, if you've been at a role for a period of time post adjustment and that's how you operate, you're just an awful manager. And potentially,
but don't you think you said insecure, right? And I think that's the truth for both scenarios. It's like, I'm not going to be okay unless I prove myself that I can do this. And I'm not going to be okay. It's an insecurity. I don't feel like I'm enough. Making, in the investment bank situation, making a choice saying, no, I deserve to be treated better. This is not okay, right? I don't feel like I'm enough, that I'm worth making that decision. Or in the other case, I don't feel like I'm enough. Like I don't trust the people. I don't, I don't trust myself as a leader. I think it's that insecurity. I mean, we can see examples of insecurity.
My point was, I think you get a pass on being insecure when you're new at something because you are insecure.
Right.
If you're a competent person, if you've never done X before, that angst and anxiety and stuff, that's actually probably a little bit healthy until you get your bearings, right? Then it's like, okay, I know how to do my job, which is not the job I used to do. Why do I need to, proofread every PowerPoint or whatever the thing is that's micromanaging and not helpful and whatever. You're either insecure, a bad manager, or a bad person potentially.
Yeah, what's interesting is many years after I experienced correcting the behavior, I fell under somebody who was a combination of snowplow and micromanagement. And I actually tried the technique that worked on me, which was to sort of pitch, you have all these other things to do in your job, leave this other stuff to us. And they just were unable to get themselves out of it. And so it's interesting when we're talking about insecurity and just, Kimberly, what you're saying about people's like belief about wanting to succeed. That snowplow manager was so busy, everything was a crisis. Everything was okay right now because they were in the middle of everything and they needed to move things along. And because they're the only one doing it, there was always this urgency. And I watched hundreds of people get tasked to do work. And in policing, it's like a different kind of level of anxiety sometimes. People get pulled away and tasked to do like hours and hours and hours of work on a task or a project or something that was unfolding. But because the snowplow manager had failed to include the right people in the conversation, 5, 6, 7 days into the task, that chatter starts happening that something's unfolding, and then the people who should have been given the work find out about the work, and then all of a sudden they're sounding the alarm like that's not the right way to do it, that's actually a breach of either the policy or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So 6 days of doing anxious work then means, okay, now we got to start over because there's some people who've come to the table late to the game that have
Right.
said you're going to really derail the organization or something by continuing on this
Yeah.
path. So you
Hmm.
watch people having really run themselves ragged, staying up late, trying to get the work done. And then that work is completely irrelevant. And then they start over again because someone's come to the table because the
Mhm.
snowplow manager just didn't slow down. And they always say, like, slow is fast, right? And
Mhm.
I find the snowplow manager creates the hundreds of hours of work because they're doing the work themselves, work that they should
Yeah.
not be in.
Yeah.
And to your point, Kimberly, I think it becomes a combination of how this can't eventually the manager has to stop. People start believing, okay, this is not sustainable. They'll eventually change their ways, and you
Yeah.
get stuck in the environment because you're like waiting and waiting, and it's just
Yeah.
ongoing. And then you're a year in the job or 6 months in the job, and you're
Right.
like, how do I get out of this environment now?
Yeah.
Because it's been like this from the start. So you start
Yeah.
to be like, now I'm 2 years invested, and how do
Yeah.
I get out?
Yeah.
Right?
And then it's learned helplessness,
Yeah,
right? You're like, well, nothing I'm going to do is going to matter. So you
that's
just
right.
And
engage
what,
in.
what I hear in this conversation is that manager may be, the snowplow manager style may be a symptom of an individual's insecurity or unpreparedness for the job, which
Mhm.
would go hand in hand.
Mhm.
Whereas the investment banker scenario we saw seems to be a systemic problem. It seems to be
Mhm.
a problem with the culture as
Mhm.
opposed to a problem with the individual.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's yeah, I think that's right because everybody's doing it there, right?
Yeah.
So if you look around, if you're in trading, investment banking, consulting, whatever, you look around and go, this is crazy world. Everybody's working 90
Yeah.
hours. Everybody's doing this. So that's a cultural piece.
Mhm.
I remember it's about 6, 7 years ago. There's a bunch of analysts, the associates at Goldman, and they did that PowerPoint that went viral on
Mhm.
why it's awful to work 90 hours a week, which
Mhm.
led to them ruling that the big ruling for them to loosen it up was they can only work one full day on a weekend and they shouldn't be there past midnight and be back to like what the policy that became was like, okay, like only beat the slaves on the odd days, not even. It was like such a ridiculous reaction.
Crazy.
But you talk to anyone that's an associate at a top tier law firm, they're they're working. Now, whether it's remote, home, whatever, it's a billable, part of its business model, billable
Yeah.
hour models, consulting models, whatever. That's not going to change in some instances.
Well, but the thing is that I don't get is this couldn't happen if people didn't choose to say, okay, I'll sign up for this, right?
Mhm.
And not only do people sign up for it, they're climbing over each other to
Yeah.
get that great job that treats them so badly, right? And I think it goes back to the promise of, well, what are you exchanging for this? Is the promise of power and money. And but if you didn't say, if there were people that said, no, no, this is not okay, I'm not going to do this. If nobody said, yeah, sign me up for this, they wouldn't get away with it. But it's like in the acting industry, right? In the acting industry, there are so many actors out there that want to be in the acting industry, that want to succeed. And so they will do anything it takes to succeed. And so they will take pay that is way below what they're worth. They'll be treated in ways that are way worse because they are essentially seen as expendable. And I think that's true in the investment banking world as well. You don't want it, there's going to be 10 people behind you that are lined up saying that they're going to do it. They're going to do it too. And you have to go, well, what as a society are we doing that says this is okay to treat
Mhm.
people like this? And because we're seeing it from every level nowadays. I mean, this is not just happening in the investment banking world. This is happening. We're giving people permission to treat people badly from a very high stages nowadays.
I will
And
say that my son works for JP Morgan as an investment banker, and he the at the end of one year, his boss called him in and said, "Don't come in until next year." He said, "You have not taken enough time off, and if you don't take your time off, I'm going to get in trouble."
That's great.
And this it is really refreshing to hear this.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder whether where does this norm or stereotype come from about investment banks? Are they individual cases? Are some of them presenting themselves as, yes, we believe in life balance. You won't have to work Saturdays, and then just not following their own rules. Um, if if the problem is that the culture has taken on a life of its own, then it's the responsibility of the people in charge to be aware of that and address
But
it.
it sounds to me in this instance, the people in charge were driving that.
Right. And if they're driving
It's
it,
not
then
that they
that's a whole
were
different
unaware,
problem.
it's that they were driving it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's to some degree a hazing ritual, if you will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the other is when you look at the pull model, the recruit model, a lot of them are pulling from, college level athletes at top level schools. So there's a
Right.
hyper competitive, throw in the dollar
Yeah.
piece and a little bro culture machismo. And oh, if we were all colleagues and work starts at 8 and Kimberly starts getting in at 7:45, I'm going to get in at 7:30.
Yeah.
I'm going to get
Mhm.
in.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, it's like, okay, well, I'll just sleep under my it gets a little silly, but you see these actions and you're like, really? So you're getting there at 4:30 in the morning and what?
It's
You know,
crazy.
it's a really interesting conversation because when I was a serious crime investigator early on, this is how our culture changed. We expected our police officers to be on call 24/7, uncompensated, not paid, meaning I could call you at any time in the middle of the night or on your day off or on the weekend. The only thing that was sacred was if you were on confirmed time off and out of town. And there was no compensation for that. So you never knew when the phone was going to ring. You might have been at a birthday party or whatever. The expectation would be to come in. And it's so funny when you said that someone will always do it because I remember when my team started to complain. Now, I did it because it was done to me. It's what the
That's it,
culture
right?
was. My boss expected me to be on call, and so therefore I expected my team on call. And I remember my team started saying, we get no compensation. So I wait around. Sometimes you call, sometimes you don't. I don't go for dinner. I don't have the glass of wine. I don't do the whatever it is. And I'm like, then if you don't want to do the job, someone else is willing to do it. And
Mhm.
what was funny is there was always someone willing to do it until all of a sudden there wasn't. And the talent who was willing to do the job started to drop off. And then
Right.
all of a sudden the unions got involved and it was like, if you want good people to come to your team, so this is what changed the leadership
Yeah.
behavior was the good people wanted to have a better life. They were taking jobs and roles that didn't require them being called. And
Yeah.
I wanted the best people. So we started having to compensate people for it. And so it's right. Like I think when the leaders are driving the nature of the way the job is done, there has to be something unpleasant for the leader or a risk to the leader, unless they are just the kind of person that's, I'm going to come into the job and be good to people, which we all hope everybody will. But when
Yeah.
you're sandwiched in the middle of management and your bosses expect that from
Right.
you, either you're the one coming in by yourself or you have to have the same expectation of your people. But that's what finally changed it for us, where people, to your point, Kimberly, were like, I am no longer interested in this way of doing business. I'm going to move on. And
Yeah.
so to draw them and keep them and encourage them, the culture had to change.
Yeah.
Well,
And I
Peter,
think we're
you
seeing that
mentioned,
in across industries, Jen. I think we're seeing
Yeah.
it everywhere, where now we expect people, people are having to do a million times more than they've ever had to do. They've got their iPhones perched on their bedside tables and expected to respond in a moment's notice and go back to work after they put their kids down to bed and do global conference calls in the middle of the night in their jammies. We never expected, it used to be a 9 to 5 thing. And because we never expected that, we expect so much more, people are finally saying, wait, the old contract where I give you my 8 hours a day and I've got job security, that contract's gone. There is no such thing as job security. So
Right.
now people are saying, well, if I'm going to give you all of this extra effort and I'm going to, you want more of me, then I'm going to expect more of you.
Right.
And
You know, it's so funny. I was listening to you talk like that, and all I could picture was the TV show Mad Men. When you're like, when you went home at the end of the day, you were just done. The only way to get a hold of you was if you were in your kitchen and the phone
Right.
rang. And the worst thing for the employee was the advent of like the smartphone. You're always available for email, for calls, like you're never unavailable. And you're right. There is not any real thought or compensation for what that means for the employee, but
Right.
you almost can't justify that you didn't have your phone with you.
Yeah, right. I have a girlfriend who works for one of the big four accounting firms, and she works in HR. And she had to be on a mandatory global conference call at 4 a.m. in her pajamas. Well, she could have worn
I was going to
clothes.
say, she
I
had to
think
be
she
in
wore
pajamas.
pajamas.
Well, it wasn't mandatory,
But
right?
she's required. It's mandatory conference
Right.
call globally, right? The topic of this conference call, what do you think it was?
Wellness,
Work-life balance.
health,
Work-life
Work-life
balance.
balance. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? This is insane.
Well, so let's follow that because Peter, you mentioned this PowerPoint about how productivity plummets when you overwork your people, and I mean that was part of the story here, that we don't get the results we want from our people because we are overworking them. So
Mhm.
why do we have to reach a point like you described, Jen, where oh, I'm not going to be able to attract people unless I stop overworking them when I've got plenty of data in front of me that shows that my business would be doing better if I wouldn't
Right,
be overworking, if I would be
right.
giving people normal lives. Where
Yeah.
is the disconnect?
Yeah, that's really the zillion-dollar question because I think from what I've experienced and what I've seen is the reality is when COVID hit and all of a sudden the whole world worked remotely and from home, the dirty secret was most people that had a 9 to 5 job could do it in 4 hours. Why?
Yeah.
There's not the
Yeah.
coffee clocks. There's not the what's for
Yeah.
lunch. Oh, it's Jamie's baby's birthday shower. It's Sally
Right.
counting. Like the reality is in most, and maybe we'll get some pushback with, most corporate jobs, 9 to 5, whatever, they're not working 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nonsense and whatever.
Yeah.
When it was work from home, and we had a lot of other stresses with COVID, the objective was how quickly can I get done what I need to get done? Because I don't need to show off to anybody that I'm here till 6 o'clock. I can
Right.
jump on a pellet
Right.
in the afternoon. I could,
Right.
Yeah.
whatever
Right.
the whatever is. So I think that's the real question, Yonason. If you're saying, listen, law firms, I understand the math, right? If each
It's
human
billable hours, baby.
right, it's 2,000 billable hours a year times X dollars, which is probably 4 to 5 times your salary. That's the business model, right? So it's always going to be more. In other roles where it's not an hour, we're not selling hours. Why would you possibly do that? Wouldn't you want the most productive, the highest productivity out of your people long term in a sustainable way? That to me seems like just smart business. So I don't understand if it's a psychotic.
Well, you know what? You're hitting on something super interesting because as you were talking, I was like, it was connecting Kimberly's idea of you got to be seen as successful in the job, and the way you were talking about the lawyers translating it is that have we somehow told our generation or whoever's in the workforce right now that long hours equates to competence, dedication, instead of it being, the shorter hour would show presumably that you're more competent if you can get the job done quicker and more efficiently. But there's something connected to being able to brag about I work 100-hour work week where people are like,
It's
oh,
identity stuff.
you're such a hard
Yeah.
worker. Well, you know what? The hard worker might be doing it in 30 hours. And so why don't we say, wow, look at the people who are efficient and healthy and, are getting sleep and thinking better and making
Yeah.
better choices, but we don't reward the efficient, competent people that can get, it's always like pat on the back for how long and hard you're at
Right.
work. And why is that? Why is the culture that is something to be admired?
Our Protestant
That's
work ethic.
measuring what matters. To me, that's about measuring what matters because a terrible manager can look at the number of hours you're there. But
Right.
so what? Like, wouldn't it be better to say, "Hey, boss, here's the amount of value I created this week,"
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the
and
difference you made while you
in a
during
smart
that time?
possible
Yeah.
Yeah.
and say, "Did you get it all done by lunchtime on Monday? I didn't see it till next week. I don't care. You got all that done? Cool. Like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
expected of you."
I mean, I
It's
remember this
control,
goes
though. A
back a
lot
few
of it's
years.
control.
It goes back a few years that I think it was Glenn Beck who went on a tour of the Facebook campus, and he was talking about it is unbelievable. They've got restaurants, they've got rec rooms, they've got game
I think
rooms, they've got meditation rooms, they've got saunas and massages and nurseries for the kids. And he asked, he says, "How does any work get done here?" He says, "What are you talking about? If you don't do your work, you're fired. We don't care when you do it.
Mhm.
We don't care where you do it. We just
no,
want
but
it done."
I think the Silicon Valley, I think you might be missing the point a little bit. They give them everything they need, so there's no excuse to leave, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
When a company buys you lunch or dinner for staying after certain hours, the exchange rate of an $8 turkey sandwich for an hour of labor is pretty bad. Like, do you remember Soylent, that drink? So it was a
Mhm.
product that's out there. Of course, this can only be done in Silicon Valley, where the coders were thinking, we work 100 hours a week. This whole meal thing takes too much time. How do we do it easier? So they put this high protein slushy thing together that also raised a bunch of money. Like, eating's inefficient. Just drink this glop, like the astronauts do, to get the protein you need. Like, that's a little
Yeah,
strange.
yeah,
But I would argue that Meta's not doing this because they're good people. They're not doing your dry cleaning
I
and
would
cleaning
agree
your
with you.
dog. They're
Oh,
like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
there is no excuse to go home. Everything's
Yeah.
here, right? You can eat 3
Right.
meals a day or whatever.
You know,
so then,
Jen, when you were talking about the 24/7 you're on call thing, I was thinking about a conversation I had recently with a friend of mine who's got a son in law enforcement and the mental health crisis that's really happening in law enforcement. And, you know, who do we want taking care of our communities? People who
Mhm.
are mentally healthy and taking care of themselves, or
Mhm.
people who are on the edge. And finally, I think the conversation's opening up, but it's taken
Mhm.
so much for that to happen. And I
Mhm.
think that's happening to us across the globe in every sector to some degree, is that mental health is starting to really fray. And we're seeing, oh wow, you know, we're not able to do what we thought we could do.
Mhm.
And
It's interesting because I think that there are a lot of great leaders and companies out there that are human centered and centric around people and health and wellness. But I've seen the research, and especially in policing, what's actually kind of sad is the real changes that mattered with mental health and care for police officers happened when the research showed that it was uh, more risk adverse for the organization to ignore it than to actually
well, it's
make
like it
changes.
becomes like it's liability. When the
Yeah, so they
liability
weren't doing
becomes,
it to, yeah,
yeah,
they weren't doing it to
yeah.
because they cared
right,
about the humans. It was
right,
like we get less complaints, we're likely to make like better decisions. So officer involved shootings,
yeah,
excessive use of force, corruption, stealing, all that kind of stuff happens when we treat them better. And so you could have been doing it, but then when the research showed you are going to have less liability by behaving a certain way, it
right,
was that made the behavior change,
yeah,
right? And so I think for some of these other lines of work, maybe they just haven't hit that crisis point of it is actually a liability for us to not change our behavior. If it's still
yeah,
working for them right now,
yeah,
why would they change? Like, what's the thing
right,
that's going to make?
right.
Because I know what it made
Well,
it changed in policing, but what's the thing that makes it change?
and I do think that we need to have a conversation, to create the conversation where people feel like you can make a different choice. You don't have to say yes to this. And I think people have lost their sense of agency, that like I can make a different choice. I can do something different. And that's a problem.
Well, and I think Peter brought it up at the first start. Like, you know, they take the job knowing, like, they certainly have to have known the average person's working this many hours and this is the grind you're going into. And they do it anyways. And then when they're in it, they're like, this really sucks. And part of me is like, did they actually think maybe that it would be different once they got there, or that they would be able to, I'm going to behave differently. I'm not going to work like that. And then they find themselves
Yeah,
unable to do it because it does seem a little bit like you kind of know in some sense what's in store for you. You should do your research. But I don't know what it is that makes people decide to say enough's enough. Having a job and security and being able to pay for the bills is a fairly motivating factor to stay in an unpleasant
yeah,
environment,
yeah.
unfortunately, right?
But don't you think we glamorize things and that from the outside in, we look at it and go, oh, look at how successful they are. I mean, even I think about like the keynoting world, right? Oh, it's so
Right.
glamorous and people know it. Well, do you realize they live on an airplane? You're on an airplane and you never see your family because you're always on an airplane and you're in a different hotel eating different hotel chicken in a different city so
But
it's not
Kimberly,
as glamorous as people think. And I think that's, we glamorize it and then expect it to be different.
yeah, but we do. But the trade-off there is if you're a keynoter, and I work with hundreds of them, boo-hoo, you got paid 25 grand to get up on the stage and do your thing. If you didn't want to if that's not something you want to do, then do something else, right? Like
It's a trade-off. It's a
and
trade-off.
by the way, at the end of your big hour on stage, you get a standing ovation. The mailman doesn't get that. So that is the
Yeah.
trade-off that you're taking for that gig. And I think part of it, what happens is it's glamorous until it's not. Or that
Yes.
job of 100
Yes.
hours a week might be
Yeah.
cool when you're in your 20s, but
Yeah.
then you're in your 30s and it's like now it's so
Yeah.
it could be there's a moment in time for each of us when, there are things now I wouldn't do that I was doing in my 20s and 30s.
Right.
Intensity of
Yeah.
or
That's a really good point. So the newbies coming in take part in a process that's been created by the prior generation. But when that generation becomes a little older, they actually don't like the system that they've established, but it's almost impossible to change it. It's like they're married with kids and want to cut the hours in half, but they were part of perpetuating the
Right.
system that they're all in, right?
Right.
Right. And the system
Well,
takes on an inertia.
about
I mean, Kimberly, it's
agency.
nice to say that, people need to stand up and say, I'm not gonna take this anymore.
Mhm.
But if someone else is just gonna step in,
Yeah.
and my only option is to go to another place with the same situation, the same
Well, that's
circumstances
true.
apply, then
That's
I do
true.
kind of feel trapped.
And I think we
can't convince
also
myself,
have a cultures that we live way beyond our means, so
oh,
we don't
yes.
have the freedom to make choices and have the autonomy of saying, no, this won't work for me, and I trust that I'm going to be okay.
So where does that leave us?
Oh, I don't know. Gosh.
Were we supposed to solve something today or just talk about it? I'm not sure.
We need a
Well,
ruling.
hope springs eternal.
Yeah. I didn't mean to shut down the whole conversation.
I'm just left with my original question, because really what you brought into focus, Jen, was that it seems like an organization has to reach a crisis point before change happens,
Yeah.
even when all the information is right before their eyes.
Yeah.
When I've been interviewed about ethics and culture, one of the questions I get is, what you're saying makes so much sense. How come people don't get it? And I wish I had a better answer to that question.
Yeah.
I would say that it's either the organization and or the individual gets there until there's a break point.
Yeah.
Right. So unless
Mhm.
there's something comes to a head, it might be okay until it's not, right?
Mhm. It seems like such an inefficient way to operate when we know that there are better ways. And why don't we just start with the better way?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just easier when it's like counting hours as
Mhm.
opposed to measuring productivity.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just easier.
It's lazy, but it's easier. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I think this is one of the big challenges that emerging leaders are facing right now is they know that what was happening before didn't work. They want to
Right.
do something different, but there are no models for how to do that. And so they have to really trust themselves, and they're at a point in their career where they don't really have that strong self-belief, that strong self-confidence to make powerful choices that are different than their predecessors. And yet that is what is being asked of them today for us to have a different future.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think of the way we pay for things, and they're broken down usually in a couple of different ways. You pay for someone's time. I pay for, let's say, a 60-minute massage. The masseuse has got to massage me for 60 minutes. Sorry if that was an awkward thing, but it was the only thing that popped into my
It
mind.
sounds good.
Or or I pay for a service that's not time-based, but for example, I hire someone and say, I want you to replace my front lawn. And I'm
Mhm.
not going to pay you for how long it takes you to do it. I'm going to pay you for the quality of the fact that you have to pull up the sod, you have to fertilize it, you have to level it
Right.
or whatever. And I don't care, but I'm paying for that product to be finished. So one is like time-based and one is service-based. And it sort of goes back to what Peter, you were sort of saying is like, how do we measure that? Like, you don't care if the person is there 20 hours, 80 hours, or 100 hours. Good on the 20-hour person if the quality of the product that they produce for the organization is exactly what the person who took 100 hours. Too bad for the 100-hour person because you've missed out on a lot of your life and you're going to be exhausted because you can't just get your stuff together enough to figure out how to do the job efficiently. And so it's interesting, with those that really get ahead, they either do a really good quality 60-minute job or they're really efficient at the work that they do so they can get a lot of jobs in, and that's how they become
Right.
successful. And I just think these hours-based organizations are perpetuating a line of work that just you're paid by the hour, not necessarily by the quality or how efficient you are.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about different industry I know how in policing that translates because when we need something done, we often need it done very quickly and efficiently. And if you take too long to do it, you're not going to be in the job for very long.
Right. Right.
It really
Okay,
becomes the
I didn't want to shut it down over the
no,
massage
no,
comment. So
we're getting ready to wrap it up.
okay.
Uh, at least this segment. But it really, I mean, ultimately everything is top down, and we really need to look at what is missing in top management, that the cultures are so many of our work cultures are unhealthy. And why is this allowed to go on? Or even worse, why is it perpetuated? Uh, it's really quite baffling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One of the stories they
Yonason,
told
I
about
actually
Enron.
what came up for me when you were saying that is yes, and yes, it comes from top down, but if we wait for the top to change, nothing's ever going to change. So it really has to become with where we are right now, who you are right now, what are you personally going to do
Mhm.
to create change in this, whatever, however small that is. And because I don't know that we can change a system and that has been in place for a long time, but I know that we have an opportunity to make new choices in every situation we face. So what are we going to do about it? To the best of our ability, and you know, not just hoping that it's going to change above in
Yeah, and
any
I think that's what the
way.
story you started with, Jen, about your team coming to you,
Mhm.
is really such an instructive and in many ways inspiring story
Yeah.
that people said, this is not working. And they came to you as a team, which created a certain safety in numbers, and they came to you respectfully.
Mhm.
And apparently they had enough confidence in you that they were willing to make themselves
Yeah.
somewhat vulnerable.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and when you can develop, even the other problems in the culture will then start to remedy themselves
Yeah. Yeah.
because you have open communication, you have a culture of trust, you have people supporting each other,
Yeah.
and then we can actually address these problems, and maybe we can see
Yeah.
some progress as we go. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Kimberly
Another
Davis
great
and
conversation,
Hyland,
Yonason.
Peter Winick.
Thank you.
Delightful to have you here. For those of you who are watching and listening, we do have sometimes a backstage conversation, and you can have access to that if you go to my Substack and become a premium member. If you have a topic you'd like us to take up for a future episode, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's something compelling, we will take it up in a future episode. And as always, we encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.